ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad that all of you are here. I'm a little loud, but you know, get some feedback. Just so everyone knows, if you need to use the restroom, please feel free to get out and walk by me. The restroom is right outside this door. But thank you for coming out this evening to hear about the Susquehanna Canal. As Ken said, my name is Bill Behrman. I've been a resident here in Port Deposit for about 5 years. Both my wife and I love this town and love the history of the town. And recently I got involved with the Port Deposit Heritage Museum. So, corporation. I've been fascinated with history, and I have also been a canal run since way back. And I was thrilled to find out that there was this canal somewhere, and I knew about the canal across the river, but I wasn't sure if it was the Susquehanna Canal, was it the one across the river, was it here? But tonight what I'm going to talk to you about is, in fact, the Susquehanna Canal of Cecil County. So I need to start off by saying I am an amateur historian. This is a hobby. So to paraphrase Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is an incredible astronomer, astrophysicist, he says, a great challenge of life is knowing enough to think you know everything, but not knowing enough to know you're wrong. So I may have gotten some of the facts wrong, my dates might be a little wrong, my name is pronounced the name, please forgive me, but I'm going to give you the most historical account of the Susquehanna Canal that I can in research that I've been doing for about 9 months now. So I look forward to sharing what I found. If you've got information that you want to share with me about the canal, let me know after the meeting, because I'd love to find out more about this wonderful canal, as well as the canal across the river, the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal. So on behalf of the Port Deposit Heritage Corporation, I'm going to present to you now the rise and fall of the Port Deposit Canal. So in 1783, a small group of business people saw an opportunity to take advantage and make the lower Susquehanna more navigable so that they could improve trade and commerce to Baltimore. They undertake this endeavor, and it's one of the first of its kind in the country back in 1783, and it's called the Susquehanna Canal. Now, it's also known as the Port Deposit Canal, the Maryland Canal, depending on what time you're looking at it. It's also called the Old Maryland Canal, or the Columbia Canal. So it took over 19 years to build the canal. And it was only open for business for around 14 years, but it left many important legacies on both Port Deposit and Cecil County. And I'm going to share some of those with you today. So let's talk about what the new country looked like immediately after the Revolution. In 1783, the British surrendered at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. It's not until 1783 that evacuation day happens in New York, and the British finally leave the country. The Treaty of Paris is signed in 1783. And the Treaty of Paris basically provides the colonists freedom from British monarchical reign, and it also the British cede all of the the land east of the Mississippi to the new colonists. The fledgling government creates the Articles of Confederation in 1777. These articles basically give more power to the state governments and leave a more weaker centralized government. So again, there's no Constitution of the United States until 1787. George Washington isn't elected president until 1789. The debt of the Revolutionary War has been placed upon the states, and it's $43 million at that time. It's huge. And Congress is finally given the power to raise taxes to cover the governmental costs. And the state governments now are becoming very interested in what they are calling internal improvements. And these internal improvements are the first public works in the young country. This is a map of the United States and what it looked like in 1783. And you can see this is the Mississippi. The Treaty of Paris opens up the Northwest Territory, and there's an immediate expansion westward expansion had begun. And with that expansion, inland trade needs to follow. There are tremendous resources beyond the Appalachian, and all of the states are looking to take advantage of their own natural resources in order to enhance trade or communication with the hinterland. That would be any area inland from the areas that are now. Those natural resources include coastlines, they include rivers that are navigable if you can get up or down those rivers. It could include the trails of the indigenous people. They become the first highways, the first roads as we're moving into the west. Pennsylvania established the first turnpikes in 1771. And you have to understand, roads back then were not passable for large cargo. They were deeply rutted, it was muddy, it was difficult to transport. Transporting by water is very inexpensive. It was faster to move coal back and forth between England and the United States than it was to bring it down from Pennsylvania at the time. And that's why they were looking at water transportation. Water transportation was 10 times less expensive at transportation over the road with the heavy cargoes are being moved. One of the natural resources here in Maryland, of course, is the Susquehanna River. And the Marylanders see the Susquehanna as their river. They want to take advantage of the trade that would be coming down the Susquehanna River from Pennsylvania, from New York, and beyond. Now, making it to Lake Erie and the Great Lakes, all of that's a dream at this point. We haven't even started when we might have been dreaming about the Erie Canal. The Erie Canal isn't again until almost 1817. And that's about the same time as the first river crossing here on the Susquehanna, right here in Port Deposit. This background picture that you're looking at is Benjamin Latrobe sketches. He was an architect, and he did a lot of sketching and watercolors while he was surveying. And this is actually the Susquehanna River, looking up the river from Havertys. You can see Garrett Island or Palmer Island here in the foreground. In the background, you can see Mount Ararat. In Port Deposit will be somewhere just around the bend on the Susquehanna River. So the Susquehanna River is 444 miles long. It's the longest river on the east coast of the United States. And by watershed area, it's the 16th largest in the country. The headwaters start in Cooperstown, upstate New York, and then come down, flows through Pennsylvania and Maryland. And it accounts for over 40% of the fresh water that's flowing in Chesapeake Bay. Now, one thing that's interesting about the Susquehanna, unlike a lot of rivers, it was navigable to an extent, but the last 50 miles was extremely shallow and rocky. There were a lot of obstructions that are standing in the way of trade. This is the Susquehanna River. You can see it's divided into three parts: the upper Susquehanna, middle Susquehanna, and the west branch, which is the Chineoga River. And really, what we were focusing on back then for the Susquehanna Canal or the Port Deposit Canal was the lower Susquehanna. And this is the area that we're going to focus on. So before we talk about the Susquehanna Canal, let's talk about what is a canal. So by that definition, a canal is an artificial waterway constructed to allow passage of boats or ships inland or to convey water for irrigation. That's the definition as the Oxford Dictionary. Brief history of canals. The first known irrigation canal began in Mesopotamia. In 3000 BC, the irrigation and water storage systems start in India. In 510 to 520 AD, there's transport canals developed in Persia by the Persians in Egypt. In 900 AD, we begin to see the first flat plot, where they're actually accounting for the change in elevation that would normally be a falls that fill up a river or a pond, and then they dump the craft over it into the other pond. That was the way that they would move. It's called a flat plot. In 1373 AD, the European padlock appears in the Netherlands. And in 1497, the first lift lock is developed in Italy as part of the San Marcos Canal. And believe it or not, Leonardo da Vinci was involved in planning the first canal in San Marcos. And what's amazing is if you look at this canal gate, this is very similar to what we see in canal construction from the 1800s right through the early 1900s. This same gate endures, and it is basically meets. It's called a miter gate. It meets at an angle to hold the water back. Yet when the water fills the lift lock, it allows for these gates to open easily. It's got the paddles that allow water in and out of the lift lock, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But truly amazing that this is the design that we have in the American canals today. Now, Britain at the same time is dealing with another revolution, not just the American Revolution. In 1760, well before the American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution begins as England is dominating the world. Right? They're taking over as much as they can. And it forces them to move from cottage industry, which is manufacturing things locally, to a manufacturing process. And manufacturing required mechanization. And really to drive that mechanization was coal. So in 1759, the Duke of Bridgewater is looking to improve transport from his coal mines out to basically Manchester. And to do that, he looks to water to convey his coal on a canal. So he commissioned James Bringley, who is an English engineer, to build the first canals in the UK. And he sparked construction of canals of over 2,000 miles of canals in the UK. Now, what's really interesting about this is James Bringley was also the principal engineer for the Susquehanna Canal. Now, it wasn't the English engineer, it was his nephew. His nephew comes over from England after studying under his uncle and is immediately introduced to George Washington. George Washington was very keen on canals before he was president. He's involved in the Patagonia Canal, he's involved in the Chesapeake and Ohio canals. So he is interested in finding out more about this. Brindley, while he is here, starting in 1783, is working on the Susquehanna Canal. But while he's there, he does much consulting for many other canals throughout America. And he's really one of the primary engineers of early American canals. He did the Santee Canal in South Carolina. He does the Conewago Canal, which is a bypass canal. It goes around the falls at what is essentially today 3 Mile Island. And he's extremely important when it comes to building canals here in America. So here is the anatomy of a canal. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of what a canal looks like. Here you can see the artificial canal bed is moving up the terrain, the natural terrain. It's each one of the locks here. These are the lift locks, and they are stepping the boat up or down to meet the natural elevation changes without any kind of fall or obstacle. You have the tow path where draft animals would have been used to pull the boats. Now this boat does not have a draft animal with it, so it would have had to be pulled up the canal or pulled up the canal by people. Again, this would be representative of what a canal looks like here in America. I'm sorry, this is England. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica. Pay attention to these locks, because these locks, in the next slide, I'm going to show you how a lift lock actually works. And you can see the miter gates here, and very similar to what Da Vinci had developed. And we'll show you how the lift lock works. It works completely by gravity. And this is what makes the canal such a good opportunity for transport up and down the river. So what's the lift lock? Here's the lift lock. This is an example. Shows the boat moving up or down the canal. As it comes into the lock, the gate is closed, the paddles are shut, paddles are opened on the other side. When the pressure equalizes, at the top or the bottom of the canal. It allows the doors to open easily, and you can make this move up or down. So it's the lid block that really allows for two-way trade. You're not just coming down the river and having a difficult time getting back up. You're able to move very simply on what is essentially a still water canal. Well, let's talk about the Susquehanna Canal. In the November session of the Maryland General Assembly in 1783, they passed an act for making the Susquehanna more navigable. And it's to be navigable from the Maryland state line down to the Tidewater, which is here just north of Rock Run and below what is today known as Smith Falls. This would have made it about a 9 or 10 mile canal when it was completed. Here is the USGS Everglades quadrennial topographical map from the early 1900s. And this is before the construction of the dam. So this gives you an idea of where exactly the canal was. And I'm going to spend some more time showing you different maps of the canal as we move forward. So the green here is Port Deposit. The red is the trail of the canal itself. Again, it's roughly 9 miles up the river, and it's head of the canal is based at Wildfire Mountain, near Wildfire Mountain, directly across from Broad Creek. Now, in 1926 or 28, they built the dam. Only this area that you see along here is now submerged under the Colorado Reservoir. This is the Orange Mayo map. This is a map from 1977, and it depicts the route of the canal. And you can see the canal comes. The canal comes in here at Wildfire, and it's called Love Island. Comes down to just north of the Conowingo Creek, or I'm sorry, blocks or south of Conowingo Creek. Second set of blocks came down at the Octorara River, just north of the Octorara. And then it flows down to the Tidewater here, just north of Rockland and directly across from Steel Island. The act that happened in 1783 by the Maryland legislature also creates the incorporation that's known as the Proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal. This was a group of 43 business people from Baltimore, Hartford, and Cecil counties. And they were all very successful merchants and property owners, but there were politicians and future governors of Maryland. Two of the proprietors of the 43 go on to become governors of Maryland. Many of them served as officers, lieutenants, and colonels under George Washington in the Revolutionary War. And a couple of interesting facts. William Augustine Washington, who is the nephew of George Washington's stepbrother, is one of the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal. William Carroll, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence of Maryland, is the proprietor, as well as John Rogers, and not the John Rogers Howard race, but John Rogers that actually was part of the Continental Congress, approves and votes for the Declaration of Independence, but it becomes too sick to actually go and sign it and send it Carroll instead. But John Rogers was also a proprietor of the Susquehanna Canal as well. So again, it's a group of people that were obviously very involved in the community, business people. But I think the most surprising thing that I discovered while I was doing this research is that the very first 5 commissioners of Everglades, when it was established in 1785, were proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal. Again, they were landowners. 5 of them are involved. Eventually, 8 of them get involved in as commissioners of Everglades, which is interesting and plays an important turn as you look at this a little further. So the Susquehanna Canal, the Port Deposit Canal, Conowingo Canal, Old Maryland Canal. Basically, the length of the canal was to be 10 miles long. It was to be not less than 30 feet wide. And the canal itself, the canal bed, 3 feet deep to allow passage for boats of at least 80 foot in length, and 12 feet wide through the lots. The estimated cost for this canal was 20,000 pounds at the time. 20,000 pounds today would be, from back then, 1783, would be close to $3 million. And even that's not enough, and I'll tell you more about that in just a minute. But one of the interesting things here is the corporation is given full water rights to the Susquehanna River. So they can use the canal, water rights for mills on the canal, but they can also are responsible for the water rights during the canal, or sort of clearing the Susquehanna River, and are responsible for that to the point that they are actually able to charge a toll, or they try to charge the toll to people for anyone coming across the river or down the river. So there are a lot of great resources available on the Susquehanna Canal. And these are some maps that really, I'll show you more detail of the individual parts of the canal. First one was Stephen Codicor map, and this was done in 1799. Codicor is actually surveying the lower Susquehanna. It's a great map for property ownership. He calls out property ownership, great topography of the land around the lower Susquehanna, as well as the water and the river depths. But the real reason he's doing it is to call out the new town of Havertide. And in this inset is what he envisioned, or what was envisioned as Havertide. Now, it didn't turn out that way, but this was the primary purpose of that map when it started. It gives a great view of the Maryland Canal as well. And so here we have the Maryland Canal running down the east side of the river, here on Cecil County, starting at Love's Island, directly across from Broad Creek, comes down to Conewago River right here. You've got a series of canals and, a lock, and there are step locks. So you've got to realize these locks were following the natural elevation of the canal. And so they were tied together, and they were stepping the boats down or up to the appropriate level. You can see that you've got the Octoraro River here, and you've got the southern terminus, which is just below the Smith Falls. This is a close-up view of the head of the canal, the northern terminus, near Love's Island. Codicor calls it Love's Island, LUFF Island, but it's Love's Island. It's right across from Broad Creek. And what's interesting here is you see that there is a guard lock that keeps water from coming into the canal during storms or heavy weather events. But then what's also interesting is you can see that there is a retaining wall here that the canal follows so closely to the topography of the area, and it's very steep, and on the banks here, they actually build it into the side of the mountain with these retaining walls. And this becomes a very big maintenance piece on the canals itself. Here is Conewago Creek. You can see that Codicor depicts these locks as a double set of locks, but he also calls out that there are going to be a number of mill seats. This is a pre-construction map. It was done in 1799 before they even begin construction. And he's got many, many mill seats set up here. So that means there's going to be fast water moving through the canal. And sometimes there's a contradiction between the water speeds necessary for boating and also for the millers. This would be the Octoraro Creek, and here are the Octoraro lawns. And what's interesting to note here is this is the table location of an old Indian fort. And that fort runs along a little bit of a river outlet here, or inlet here. And you can see this is pre-construction. The locks are actually parallel to the canal. That's important when we look at it in some of the other maps. They actually change to meet the actual topography. Again, you can see that there's lots of property owners called out. J. Hall, the Hall family is very involved, and they are proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal as well. Here it is, the Union Hotel. You go a little bit further south, and the Union Hotel is actually called out. This is 1799. The Union Hotel was built in 1790s. And here you see that there was a road to the east of the hotel. So if we drive the Susquehanna River Road today, you're actually to the west of it, between here and in the town. This road ran along the east side. That would be the Union Hotel. And then as we come down to the southern terminus, you can see he calls it Youngings Falls, and these are Smith Falls, right across from Steel Island. This is approximately where the VFW would be. This is, I think, Canal Road. It's either Canal Road or Mill Road, I'm not sure. Again, C. Holiday, a big property owner here in Port Deposit, also a proprietor of the Susquehanna Canal. The next map that we're going to look at is a Latrobe survey map, and this one was taken from 1801. Pennsylvania is entering their own canal bill, and they're looking to make improvements on the Susquehanna River to improve navigation for their own trade. Pennsylvania creates a law that basically declares the Susquehanna River a public highway, and all of its tributaries are a public highway. And they're creating the first turnpike in America in 1771. In 1800s, Colonel Frederick Antes commissions or is contracted to survey the Susquehanna. And he's in failing health, so he brings in his nephew, who just happens to be Benjamin Henry Latrobe. And this is Latrobe. Latrobe is known as the father of American architecture. He built or designed the new Capitol building. Baltimore Basilica was involved in the Philadelphia and Baltimore waterworks, and also was one of the first purveyors of the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. This map is a wonderful map. He surveys the Susquehanna River and ends up turning this into the governor of Pennsylvania, who commissioned the map. This map is over 17 feet long, so it's a big map. And you can see that the Pennsylvania side is all done in watercolor and pencil. We saw Latrobe's sketches earlier. This is similar. Latrobe is doing it, but the Maryland side here is done in black and white. And the Maryland side is actually done by Christian D. Hodecore, who's the same person that did the 1799 map. Latrobe wants to leverage him and his skills in designing this map. And again, it gives a great view of the canal itself. Starting here at Love's Island, this is the head of the canal. You can see that he's putting the channel information in. And this would have been for navigation purposes. Part of his job of doing a survey is to also open up navigation on the river. And he was doing that by literally blasting rocks out of the river. And you can see he establishes the new channels and the old channel on the different parts of the map. And you can see that this is the head of it right by Baldfriar Ferry and Baldfriar Crossing here, Baldfriar Falls. The new channel moves down the east side of the river and then actually cuts down to the west, which was new in order to provide navigation. One of the neat things here is you've got more of that rock retaining wall, and that rock retaining wall again is going to be a high maintenance feature in the future. We come down to the Conolingo Creek. Now you see the locks indicated as triple locks, not a double lock that Hodecore indicated initially. This is as construction is completed. He calls it a triple lock now. And instead of having all of those mills here, there's only one mill, straw mill, that is put into action. One of the neat things here is you've got this this message that says overflowed in high pressures. So during the spring freshets, when water is coming down, again, this area was overflowing potentially into the canal, causing a lot of maintenance damage. Here are the locks at the Alfararo Creek, and now you see the locks are perpendicular. And it's changed from being parallel to the canal, perpendicular, to follow the natural elevation changes and runs along that little inlet that we talked about in the previous map. You can see that the canal crosses the river and there's a dam here. And this dam is 12 feet high and over 500 feet across. And so think about an infinity pool, right? Water flows across the edge of the pool and then drops off. That's essentially what's happening here in what's called a tunnel pit. And these were made out of wooden cribs full of rocks. They would lay planks over it because wood didn't deteriorate underwater, and the water would come up and then spill over the edge. Again, here's the Union Hotel. He indicates that this is McCoy's Island, and he might have gotten that wrong because in talking to one of the property owners in the area, Tom Knight, if you're on Zoom, I'm calling you out. He actually has a title that calls it Decay's Purchase, Decay's area. So it probably is Decay, but it shows you the Union Hotel and the path of the canal. And here's the southern terminus of the canal. Now you see the three locks at the end of the canal, the approximate location of the VFW, the entrance to the canal across from Steel Island. This would have been Rock Run. In this area in between Crestwell Ferry and this road here, obviously that would become 276, the homes. You got these neighborhoods there. This is where the first part of Port Deposit begins. The next map that I want to look at is a post-construction map. And this map was done by a gentleman by the name of Edward Gang. He was the principal engineer for the Susquehanna and Tidewater Dam. And while this map is primarily designed to talk about the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal across the river, this map also has probably some of the best representations of what the old Maryland Canal, and he's calling it old here, looked like in, this is now 1835. And Cat brought in a great graphic of the canal. This is EFA's map right here. And you can see on the couch, but we'll definitely take a look at it when we're through. This is a great representation of the old canal. And if you look at it, it starts up at the head of the canal is basically at Love's Island. You can see Love Island here. A lot of commerce has developed since the canal was opened up, and it's probably responsible for creating an art haven. And there's lots of businesses that open up. It's indicated that Jacob Tone, when he first came to Port Deposit as a young man, may have been his first wife. So this area is the head of the canal. You can see that there's a little appendage here, and I believe that's a wing dam we're talking about. The Susquehanna Canal gets sold in 1817 at a sheriff sale. The new proprietors that buy it are a bit greedy. They want to take advantage of the millers and they're trying to get boats in. They actually develop a wing dam that juts out into the channel to hold boats in it. Now, this makes the control water that the boaters feel like it's pulling in, so they are charged to toll. Here's Conowingo. For the first time, we see the old Conowingo Bridge. So this is old Conowingo Bridge, went in roughly about 1820, and it's adjacent to the lock. Now, EFA shows this as being a double lock. Now, I believe that's what it was. We'll never know because it's underwater now. But that is most likely a double lock, and it proceeds down to the head of the canal, or to the southern terminus of the canal. As you come off of the Conowingo or the Octoraro River, you've got the Conowingo Park here, and that's where you can see some of the best examples of the canal today if you're looking for it. But as you come further south, this island here is actually Sterrett's Island. Sterrett was a proprietor of the Susquehanna Canal. He is the secretary and treasurer of the canal, and actually is the person who buys the canal in 1817 when it goes to sheriff sale. Now, a lot of people question the validity of that purchase, and he eventually sold it back to the proprietors. And here is the southern terminus of the canal, and you see two sets of locks now. We have a triple lock that was somewhere around Canal Road here, and then you see a guard lock that is at the base of the canal, basically a tidewater. And you see the first Susquehanna Bridge crossing on the map here. And again, right at the terminus itself, this indicates Port Deposit again between the ferry. The ferry now is called Bell's Ferry rather than Upper Ferry. And this would be rock runs, so it gives you a good idea of what that looked like. So there were a lot of challenges in the way that the providers of the Sulphana Canal ran into, and they excuse me, you have to understand that Pennsylvania and Maryland are not very collaborative. You know, the whole Mason-Dixon border dispute happened, right? Pennsylvania wants goods to move toward Philadelphia. Baltimore would love goods to flow downriver to go to Baltimore. And so there is a bit of a trade rivalry that goes on. So they're not very collaborative. Philadelphia is the third largest trading center before the Revolution. And Pennsylvania clearly doesn't want to lose their trade with farmers from the southwestern portion of their state down Sulphana. So in 1799, Pennsylvania passes an act, and makes it legal to improve the river below basically Columbia. And that is what stops the proprietors of the Sulphana Canal from extending their canal upwards into Pennsylvania. The construction workers, obviously, the proprietors of the Sulphana Canal have a little bit of surprise in 1791 when they're working on the side of the river, and that surprise was the ark. In 1791, Michael Crider, who was a milker in Pennsylvania, off of he's from Lancaster, but he's farming on the western division of the Sulphana, the Juniata River. He is frustrated with the cost of moving his freight to Philadelphia, and he wants to take advantage of water to bring it down the Susquehanna. Baltimore is paying more for flour, and so he wants to take advantage of that. So he develops the first ark. This is a 75-foot long craft. It is basically about 16 feet wide. It can hold about 200 barrels of his flour. Now, he decides he's going to build this and try it with only 104 barrels. He puts the 104 barrels onto an ark, and he and his two sons sail down the Susquehanna, Virginia first, and Susquehanna. Their trip takes 4 days, and they achieve the incredible speed of 30 miles an hour, which at the time was just about unheard of. They make the trip in 4 days. And when they arrive at Howard Grace, they transfer their transload their shipment over to a base shallop. They move that product now, the flour, down to Baltimore, and Baltimore is paying $4 a barrel. So he makes $4 a barrel plus $1 for every barrel extra as a result of making this first accomplishment. So Crider is credited as being one of the first people coming down the canal. Now, the ark is extremely important for Port Deposit history and Pennsylvania as well. There were many different variations of the ark, but it's important to note that the Sulphana Canal construction started well below or before the first ark came down the river. This is a representation of the ark that you might be familiar with. You've seen it on the Port Deposit crest. This is one of those variations, the lumber raft. Now, a lot of what's new, and obviously, Port Deposit is very famous for the amount of lumber and lumber works that are here in the area. So the proprietors underestimate the cost of the canal, and they have to go back to the Maryland legislature 4 times in 17 years for additional shares. And their initial budget of $20,000 or 20,000 pounds balloons to over 60,000 pounds in that time frame. The original completion date for the canal was to be 1791, and the Maryland legislature had to extend the canal completion date to 1805. So clearly, they're running into some challenges as they're building the canal. Two things that are very important to note for the canal is in 1795, I talked about the Howard Grace expansion. They wanted to expand Howard Grace. Two of the the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal are involved in this. They own property in Havertide Grace, and they want to give the Maryland legislature the property to expand Havertide Grace if they will allow, the Maryland legislature will allow a lottery for $50,000 to be raised so that they can clear the Susquehanna. So you start to get the impression that the proprietors of Susquehanna might be splintering here, because they're looking to take on more trade. They want it to come down the river. They don't care if it's going back up. It's going to bring more commerce to their town, and they want it to be Havertide Grace. Also, in 1799, the legislature grants more shares to raise capital, and for the first time, the legislature actually provides a loan. And this is very unique. Most of these ventures are privately funded. They offer a loan for $30,000, but they say that the state must, or I'm sorry, the corporation must spend $5,000 on river improvement, which the corporation accepts, but they accept it to be able to allow or for them to charge half tolls along the Susquehanna River. Remember I said they have the right to the river. They're going to charge the tolls, which is not a precedent that they set. It was set in Europe, but it was something that they wanted to do. So finally, the canal is demonstrated. And in 1802, the proprietors arranged for their official inspection with the governors of both Maryland and Pennsylvania. And they want to prove that the canal is going to afford safe travel. And Pennsylvania still doesn't cooperate because they're stands of making it illegal to travel on to improve the river below Columbia. Pennsylvania doesn't want to lose traffic to Baltimore or trade to Baltimore. The canal opens to limited traffic in 1802, and the shares of the corporation immediately dropped from $1,000 or £1,000 to 500 pounds. So in 1803, the canal finally opens for business. It takes 20 years to complete, 13 years of construction expansions, over 40,000 pounds over budget, $30,000 in loans, and a complete loss in confidence in the benefits of the canal on the business people of Baltimore, and also the proprietors. The proprietors relinquished their half tolls on the river because they need to raise money, and they do that. They relinquish those half tolls in exchange for quadrupling the tolls on their canal. But clearly, they're running into financial problems. But it keeps going. In 1804, the proprietors appealed to the Maryland legislature to give the canal company the opportunity to operate lotteries to supplement their electric funding. And one such lottery occurs in 1805. This is a great graphic talking about the canal or the lottery scheme, as it was called. Some great prizes. I mean, $20,000 back in the day was big. There were two $20,000 prizes, one $10,000 prize. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people involved in setting up the lottery that didn't win these, but that's another story. All of this, all of these cost overruns, Hezekiah Niles, who's the editor of the Baltimore Evening Post from 1805 to 1811, declared more money than water is being poured into the Port Deposit Canal. Almost immediately, the proprietors realized that a mistake was made. The canal is too narrow. The locks are only 12 feet wide. They've got to expand it because now it's been 20 years in the construction process. Both have gotten bigger, arcs are getting wider. The big mistake they made is they built the canal with a rounded bottom, as opposed to the nice kind of square or trapezoidal prism shape that we call it. And think square peg in a round hole. The sides are going to bottom out, and that's what happened with their boats. So in 1810, they contacted engineer John Davis. They expand the canal, but it keeps getting worse. The strong currents of the canal needed for the mill operations are just not safe for boaters. And it's almost as, or boaters, and particularly Arkmen, see it just as easy to run the river as they do to run the canal. Incidentally, less than 1% of the arcs that came down the river were actually damaged or had insurance claims placed on them, which is pretty amazing. So this begins the fall of the Port Deposit Canal. More revenues are collected because it's very limited two-way traffic. You couldn't run, much further than about 9 miles on the canal. We're not moving into Pennsylvania. They don't want to improve the river due to loss of trade. The War of 1812 brings everything to a standstill. Arcs are the favorite method of running the river. And in 1817, the finances are overextended. The proprietors in Port Deposit Canal are made to sell their canal by a sheriff canal. And it's purchased, the canal was purchased, as I mentioned before, by Samuel Sperry, who is the treasurer and secretary. The public calls that purchase in question, and he eventually sells it back to a new set of proprietors to help pay off their debts. And the new proprietors, as I mentioned earlier, also seem to be driven more by greed than they do by the benefit of commerce. They're looking to get more from the millers. They're trying to capture boats off the river. And the canal now enjoys limited, very limited use until the end of 1838, before the Susquehanna Tidewater Canal is open. And that was actually open in 1840, but I could trace commerce on the canal through 1838. Finally, there's a lot of interest in the canal. In 1801, the Maryland legislature authorized the C&D Canal, the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. And Chesapeake and Delaware doesn't open until 1829. But now Pennsylvania finally relents to improving the Susquehanna River below Columbia, because there's an equal opportunity for trade. They can come down the Susquehanna, they can go across the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal and then up the Delaware River into Philadelphia. So now they're willing to do this. And they create what's called the Susquehanna Canal Company Corporation. And that's in 1825. And Pennsylvania Assembly charters them to build the canal on the east side of the river and potentially meet the proprietors for Port Deposit Canal. The Maryland legislature at the same time creates the Tidewater Canal, and the two groups, the separate state groups, are working to try to entice the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal and join it and selling the canal. And so the Tidewater Canal is in charge of reaching out to see if they're interested in selling the canal. And in 1835, the proprietors of everything to sell it. Of course, they're trying to get rid of this, and they see an opportunity to sell their canal. But negotiations break down quickly. Negotiations are bad because the stock is overvalued. So the proprietors want over $300,000 at the time. The Susquehanna Canal Company is only willing to pay $50,000. There's a lot of back and forth. Then it's discovered that the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal may not own the actual rights to that 1.5 miles between the head of the canal, Love's Island, and the Pennsylvania state line, and to rebuild the purchase would cost over $300,000 in itself. On top of that, there's a lot of different legal actions being held against the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal, including the miller, who believes that he owns the water rights to his portion of the canal, and he wants to sell that back at $125,000. So now all of this money becomes too much for the Tidewater Canal. They throw their hands, they go back to the Pennsylvania legislature, and they say, we want the ability to build on either side. EFJ does the survey, creates the map, and the rest is history. The Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal is opened in 1840. And eventually, the Susquehanna and Tidewater entities, the separate states, want to merge the company together. And Maryland finally consents to it, provided Pennsylvania will provide a entrance into Pennsylvania of the ground. It's a new tangible thing that's coming out of the river road into the western part of the state. In Baltimore and Ohio, it will go up up toward Columbia. And they asked that they make the proprietors of Susquehanna Canal whole by buying out their shares of stock with shares of the new company. So they end up paying about $2,000 in stock on the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal for each share of the Susquehanna Canal. And that ends up being about $120,000. So it's higher than they expected to pay. They wanted to do $50,000. They get it for 120, and at that point, they realize the cost associated with opening the canal on the east side, and they decide now it's better to find down the west side and invest in the Susquehanna and Tidewater. So the legacy of the Port Deposit Canal, the Susquehanna Canal can't be viewed as a total success. It didn't open up navigation completely on the Susquehanna, but the wisdom of this first of a kind venture of the country is realized over 20 years later when Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal opened. But regardless of the success, the construction of the canal and improving the Susquehanna River developed some really important legacies to people County and Port Deposit. In 1812, a large property owner, Philip Thomas, grids out a small town named Southern China. That town becomes Port Deposit. With the commerce that's coming down the canal and coming down the river, there's a question of where they're going to locate the first Susquehanna River crossing. In 1817, the Susquehanna River Bridge was opened to take advantage of trade coming down the river. In 1829, the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal opened the first quarries in Port Deposit as a commercial venture. And that's huge. Eventually, that quarry site that they started eventually becomes McClellan's quarry, and that's what Port Deposit is renowned for. And I think probably the most amazing thing to me is that the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal, the corporation, still exists today. If you read through the SEC filings of both Exelon and Constellation, you can find the proprietors of the Susquehanna Canal listed as an affiliate corporation. And what's truly amazing is that when the power companies were acquiring the land for the dam, it was the rights of the Maryland Corporation that allows them the construction of the Conowingo Dam here in 1926. So truly amazing that, now that may not have been completely successful, played an important part here in Seaton County and Port Deposit. So let's talk about the canal today. This is about 8.3 miles. You've got all of this above the dam is underwater on a Lingo reservoir, but here on the lower Susquehanna, there's about 4.2 miles where you can potentially see some of the river, the canal. If you look at the canal streets, it closely follows the Susquehanna River Road, and you can see it from the head of the southern turn of Seal Island all the way up to the dam. And this is where I started looking for the evidence of the canal. If you use the terrain feature on Google Maps, you're able to see some definition of the canal. But what I eventually found was that Manitoba, which is a great site, actually has LiDAR images of the terrain. It gives you some really interesting points. So here would be the quarry that we talked about. This was obviously a dock area that was used to move stone in and out of the quarry. But this area, because there's been so much work with the railroads, the roads, it's difficult to find traces now in this area. This would be the VFW that's on Susquehanna River Road. So my guess is the canal probably went under or next to what is essentially the VFW. As we move north from the VFW, we find a really interesting feature, which I didn't understand what it was at first. It turns out it's actually a log pond, and it's a log pond that was put in to the canal after, or we see it after the day map and before 1858, and we see it on a Martinet map of Cecil County. And this log pond was used to store art. It was used to store lumber. Had entrances out to the actual river, but was on the canal, so it could be used. And I have evidence looking at it that says it was used at least for 1838. Now it's used in the log pond. So as we continue to the north, you start to see this little trace here along the way. You can see it. This is the Union Hotel is here and here. As you're coming up north, there's a billboard area in this area. And you can see that this canal actually crosses over the river. So at some points, it's actually west of it crosses over the Susquehanna River Road. It's actually west of the road and then east of the road and crosses over to the west. Basically parallel to the river itself. Just above the Union Hotel, you'll find this historical signs, the fire of the Susquehanna Canal. This is one of the things that really got me interested in Susquehanna Canal when I first started looking at it. And near this sign, you can actually find evidence of the canal. From this point north to the actual dam, you're able to find traces of the canal itself. And if you look carefully, this area here, it's actually the canal. This is a view just south of Connolly Park. This would be right from the road. So you're looking from Susquehanna River Road west toward the canal itself. And in the winter or late fall, when the foliage is falling, you're able to see this. Now, I've driven by there a couple of times recently, and spring is sprung, and it's not able to see that now. This would be the actual canal itself. It's really a flat water canal. It's not moving. You've got the turbine here on the left. And again, this is 30 feet long. It's just like this. Now, I can't take credit for this picture. This picture was taken by Dan Coates. Dan is the president of the Archaeological Society of the Northern Chesapeake. And he gave me a lot of great information on the Susquehanna Canal. And this was taken during obviously the winter, beautiful sunset, and just a gorgeous shot of the canal. So this would be the Octorara River, and you can see this is the Calatoco view. You can see the canal comes along here. The red is the actual perimeter trail that goes around the park. So if you cut inland, and there's a lot of heavy brush, you're going to have to cut through to get there. You can actually find traces of the canal full of water still that runs just to the west of the park. And my search for the Susquehanna Canal would have ended here, but there was definitely something going on here. And by the maps, you knew it was the locks, right? The Octorara locks. And if you take a look at this, you can see that here's that little river I talked about. You've got the canal that is dug along there, and it terminates into the separate locks. Had it not been for Dan Coates and the North Archaeological Society of Northern Chesapeake, I wouldn't have seen more of this. But they did an archaeological survey in 2008, and I've got some pictures of the Octorara locks. So this is the Archaeological Society of Northern Chesapeake. The group came out as an archaeological consultant. And they cleared the top block of the first 3 flights. Now, all 3 flights are there, but the other 2 locks, the walls are unstable, so they didn't clear those, but they cleared the top block. When they first got there, obviously, nature had taken over the lock. You can see it in the brush here. And this is what they ended up with. So they ended up clearing it. It's a beautiful site. It is on private property. It's owned by Exxon. It happens to be right under the power lines. So I'm not sure if you ever open as a place for the public to go. But it's really an amazing site. They dug for on 2 acres. They did 75 shovel test pits, where they were able to bring up artifacts. They found artifacts from the 1800s when the canal was in use. They found artifacts from 1900 when the Connolly Dam was being built. And there were a lot of workers that were camped in this area. It's amazing that this lot even survives today when some of the other ones have been taken out. They did find some evidence of indigenous artifacts, but they were unknown in terms of the dating they weren't able to do. And the one thing that was very interesting they did find was the actual paddle in one of the locks. And they found that doing metal detection, they were able to find that. So I'll close with an article from a newspaper that I found in a scrapbook at the Harford County Historical Society. And the article is from the New York Times of 1937, and it's a reprint of an article that goes back to G.W. Archer back in 1888. And the article is called Sketch of the Susquehanna Canal. And he sums up his story by saying, from the above facts, it appears that the Susquehanna Canal, although the first began in the United States, was among the very slowest in progress to completion, making on average only 1 mile every 2 years. He finishes with a quote from the Roman poet Horace, and that quote is here at the top, and it's "Futurium multis, not futur, ridiculous lux." And that stands for mountains will go into labor, and a silly little mouse will be born. But this canal was not silly at all. This was the first of its kind in the country. It was the first canal attempt made by pioneers. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what troubles they would encounter. They encountered problems that pioneers would have encountered. It's the new technology of the day. I mean, if you think about it, this is the internet of the day. This is Elon Musk creating whatever he's working on in space. And it's the wisdom and the foresight is realized from this canal when the Susquehanna Tidewater Canal opens in the Riverside in 1840. So again, while it's only 9 miles long, the canal put Port Deposit and Steeple County on the mainland, literally. So I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I do have to thank some really important people. The Steeple County Historical Society, Harford County Historical Society, the Paw Museum here at Port Deposit, the Archaeological Society of Northern Chesapeake, the Lockout Museum, Hammer Graves, and a very special thank you to Dan Coates, Kat Printed for her help with all of this, and also Julie Woodkey. I met her through the Lockhouse, and all of them provided me great information for the Susquehanna Canal in our area. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Yeah.
First, I want to thank Bill. He did a wonderful job giving us the information and about the technology. But I wanted to let you know the importance of why the canal is so important here at Port Deposit. And that we talked about the arcs. And what was happening is that the arcs were coming down the river with a one-way trip. They only could come down at the freshet, which is after the spring thaw. So New York and Pennsylvania, when the snow's melted, the river was high enough because it's a non-navigable river. So in that time, that one little bitty time, then the arcs just zoom down the river, bundles of logs zoom down the river, and right here at Port Deposit were schooners, seagoing vessels, and they all, there's all this coming from New York and Pennsylvania, going to these schooners and then all over the world. So the people in Maryland, oysters and whatever, they were thinking, how can they get their produce up? They could not go up the Susquehanna River, so the canals were being, that was the only way that they could get to the traffic. And it was true that it took all that time, 20 years, to dig the canals. And what really, I know that there was a lot of, intrigue with the money, but what really was the end of the canals was the railroad case. And the railroad made the canals obsolete. Railroads could go across the river, under the mountains, over the mountains. It didn't make any difference. And when that came in, that put an end to the canal. The canal was our way of getting all of this produce moved, because it was a one-way trip out.
Good. Thank you. Anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
One quick question. So at the height of the canal's popularity, can you quantify how busy it was? Example, X number of arcs, boats, rafts went through Port Deposit per day, week, month, whatever.
It is difficult to find information about traffic on the canal. Clearly, it wasn't a lot, but When it was necessary, the arch would jump onto the canal. If the water wasn't high enough, they would use it. I can only find statistics on the actual canal itself, or I'm sorry, on the river itself with the arch. And I believe there was something like 1,800 arcs that come down. It was in 1825 in that area. 1,800 arcs that came down the river, which is amazing.
The arcs that
Thank
are
you.
coming down the one way, they broke up the arcs, and that's what made the house up here in Port. They busted them all up over, and they, pawpaw is it's ironing board. It's an ironing board, but it's the, it's like that, it's the pillar, from the park, and they use all the pieces, all the wood to make the building.
Yes,
Can you comment a little bit on the labor that goes with the canal, who and how many?
I don't know who and how many. Danny Coates from the Archaeological Society.
The Irish lady.
Yeah, I mean, they probably were Irish laborers. I don't have a lot of information on the numbers. But Danny Coates of the American, or sorry, the Archaeological Society of the Chesapeake, he has a box of receipts that actually quantify how they run the canal. And they would contract it out in 20-yard sections. And that's how they were paid. And of course, some 20-yard sections would be easier than others. Some included black powder, where they had to blast the canal, a lot of digging, there were receipts for, spades and wheelbarrows. But I don't have a lot of information on the amount of labor that had to go into. But clearly, it's a lot. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Did anyone go bankrupt or wind up in a terrible financial situation because of this?
I think the proprietors in Susquehanna Canal did. They went to sheriff's sale. The new owners bought them, and the proprietors may have had some moderate success. But again, it's not until they're bought by the Susquehanna Canal that they're kind of made whole. That's still not the amount of money they put into in the first place. Yes.
Why not build a road?
Roads were tough. Pennsylvania is opening some of the first turnpikes, the toll roads. They have some success, but moving freight, particularly heavy freight over the roads. Maryland is credited as having some of the worst roads in the country at the time. They're deeply rutted, they're muddy. It's difficult to move on the road, and so baseball water is being the easy way to move traffic and cargo, and this is why they wanted to build the canal. Yes,
You have to feed a lot of horses.
yeah, you do. You would have to feed a lot of residents.
Did you say, maybe I misheard, the last, your research showed that the last time the canal was used was 1838? Is that what you researched?
That's what I could find. Now, it may have gone after that, but once the Susquehanna and Pioneer.
Yeah.
Was so were reported. I'm sure the one supported. Now, whether arch came through the canal or the long ramp came through the canal, I'm not sure. With the blocks that we saw, I'm not sure they would fare well a lot of lumber. Yes, sir.
With the success of the Susquehanna and Tidewater Canal, did they also go down the drain with the coming of railroad? Did it all wind up?
Well, they did, and what's interesting is the kind of crazy mill owner that I talked about. He wants to sell his rights back to the canal company for $125,000. He portended as he said was, the railroad is coming. And only him can buy his water rights, and he estimates it could be bought for as high as $500,000, which it's his right to us. What's interesting is he owns a mill. He gets angry with the proprietor of the Susquehanna Canal, so he runs the thing at full force, which essentially drains the canal. He runs it so fast that the friction from running this sawmill creates a fire, burns his mill down, and now he's out of the mill. Anyone else?
But once again, that's, thank you for doing that.
Thank you.